Cool. Okay, so this is week 7. We're doing auto layout and plugins this week. Um, okay. Any questions about assignments, midterms, or anything like that? Feel free to drop it in the chat and we'll just go over that. So auto layout. This is design dynamic frames that respond to content. So auto layout essentially lets you create dynamic frames that respond to their content. Basically, this means frames that can move along with what you're creating. So it's a property that you can add to frames and components, and it lets you create designs that grow to fill or shrink to fit, and they reflow as like the content that you guys are creating changes. So this is really great when you need to add new layers, accommodate longer text content, or maintain alignment as your designs evolve. So what can you do with auto layout? You can create buttons and cards that automatically resize as their text changes. As you can see here, it's like getting bigger as like they type more, right? And you can create menus and lists that can be quickly reordered. You can combine responsive components to create full screens that work across multiple device types. For example, this is really good like when you guys, let's say you're making your portfolios, you're going to want it to be something that someone can view on their phone as well as like their laptops and things like that. So this is really helpful for that. So getting started with auto layout. So you can add auto layout to any frame or selection of objects, and this can include components, groups, or other selections of layers. So you can add auto layout to a selected frame or component by clicking either the plus button on the right sidebar. So again, in your design sidebar, where you can find like the fonts and things like that, and you can just click auto layout, or you can use the keyboard shortcut, so Shift A or right clicking and selecting add auto layout. And yeah, so auto layout properties. So you can do direction. This describes the way the auto layout frame will flow. So like the down button is choosing vertical to add, remove, and reorder objects along the y-axis. For example, objects within a list or posts within a newsfeed or timeline. So you can, and then you can choose horizontal to add, remove, and reorder objects along the x-axis. So for example, a row of buttons or icons in a mobile navigation menu. And a little note, to build designs that support both directions, you need to nest auto layout frames. So like, you know how you can remember we talked about nesting frames? Oh, hello? Okay. You would also need to nest auto layout frames. And then spacing. So you can also control the spacing between items in an auto layout frame. So you use the spacing fields in the auto layout section of the right sidebar. So the horizontal space or the vertical space. Again, this is the right sidebar we're talking about, and this is like the auto layout that should pop up. Might look a little different every time that they update it, but you should be able to see it. If anything, do Shift A for the shortcut. And then padding. This controls the empty space between the child objects and the boundary of an auto layout frame. So you can set padding uniformly or have different values for each side. And then to enter a single value in the field, you set equal padding on all sides or use comma separated values to set each side. So, and then to set unique padding for each side, you open the alignment and distribution settings. So this is what they're talking about, and adjust each value individually. And then alignment, you can choose how to align child objects within an auto layout frame. So you use the interactive grid to select from 9 layout options, 9 being like 1, 2, 3 up here, and then 3 ways down as well, for the children in a frame. So you can select alignment options in this grid. And then distribution determines how objects will be spread or packed within an auto layout frame. And then in the alignment panel, you can see you open the drop down to select between packed. So like we talked about, objects in a frame which will be grouped together. And then you use this option to keep objects in a frame as close as possible and aligned together, or space between, which is like when objects will have equally distributed along the direction and alignment set for the frame. And this is mostly to like stretch objects across a frame. And then resizing. This determines how parent auto layout frames adapt to changes to their child objects. So resizing settings can be applied on both the horizontal and vertical axes individually. So you can have a fixed width or height, and then the frame dimensions remain the same regardless of the content within them. Hug content. So the frame resizes itself according to its child objects while keeping the tightest possible dimensions surrounding the objects within it. And then fill container, which is where child objects stretch to the width and or height of their parent frame. nesting auto layout. So you could nest an auto layout frame within another auto layout frame, and this allows you to combine horizontal and vertical layouts to create complex interfaces. So when you nest an auto layout frame, the nested frame will have both the parent and child properties, so both the horizontal and like the vertical layouts. And then you can nest it in a couple ways. You can either drag an auto layout frame into an existing auto layout frame, like this example that's going on right now, or you can create a new auto layout frame around a selection of auto layout frames. So the photo doesn't really show that, but you would just select it and put it all into another frame. And then that would become the parent frame. And here's an example. So each button is a horizontal auto layout, and this allows the button to grow and shrink as we change the label text. Button row, so we can combine buttons in another horizontal auto layout and allow objects to respond to changes in a sibling's content. A post, we then add our buttons to a vertical auto layout with the other objects in the post. And the news feed, we can add two posts to a vertical auto layout to create our feed. So all these things are being nested into each other, as you can see. Any questions about that so far? I know auto layout can be really confusing. I really only understood the button have to be its own frame. Yeah. In this example, the button is its own frame, and then it's being nested into all of these other parent frames. But yeah, I only really understood this after like practicing in the lab, so don't worry if you're like not really understanding right now. Yeah. And then content-driven design. So, content-driven design focuses on using actual content throughout the design process to inform and guide decisions. So, content includes a variety of media from text, photos, videos, charts, tables, lists, and more. And it's all about knowing what your design's purpose is and how it will achieve that purpose before you even start designing. Oftentimes, people can get really lost in like what they're exactly trying to achieve without having context or anything like that to guide them. So this is really important. The example they're giving is like when you're building a house and you're using placeholder content, it's just like telling the architect, just build the framework and we'll figure out the inside details later. But if you don't know what you want inside, how can you get a decent structure? How will you know that this couch will fit in the room? Or you might end up with a serviceable house, but the rooms will be oddly shaped and the layout won't flow. So when we worry about what a website should look like, first and foremost, we jam lorem ipsum. That's that like little writing that always shows up as placeholders. And then how do we really know how the flow and feel will be when we put the rooms into the house structure? So design should mold to the content, not the other way around. Oftentimes, designers clip the lorem ipsum writing to exactly what fits their design. And then with real content, you can just pick and choose what fits the layout. And then basing designs on content instead of handling edge cases after the fact forces you to think deeper about designing for different sizes, restrictions, and use cases. And then when you prioritize these considerations early in the design process, you can avoid like continuous rounds of iteration to handle edge cases. And this is a bad example. So this design only accounts for short Anglo-Saxon names like James, Mark, or Christian. And then how would longer names be handled? And then graphs and charts are ambiguous. What data do they represent? You can see like the placeholder gradient images give no indication of how the app would actually function. It's all pretty like scattered around, right? So good content is based on your users and their motivations. So understanding user needs is crucial, and it's vital to understand the journey they go through. This is like that user journey I think we talked about earlier in the semester. So there's several UX research tools that can also help inform these designs. And then when starting a project, you should consider the following questions. So like, what are you trying to communicate? What has the user seen before they get to your content? What other apps, for example, are there that are similar to what you're trying to produce? And what do users really want to gain from that? What is the user looking for? How can your design help them efficiently find what they need? And here's method one. So you give participants a deck of cards, each with a word or image, and then participants rank them according to a question or criteria that makes sense to them. And this helps you develop an information architecture that aligns with user expectations and values. This is journey mapping. So you visualize the major interactions and you shape a user's experience to accomplish that goal. So the sequence of interactions that make up a user's experience, how do users find what they're looking for? When you do a map like this, you can kind of walk through what exactly a user would need as they're going through your app, and it would help you visualize sort of what that user flow should look like. Information architecture, so creating a visual representation of the product's infrastructure, features, and hierarchy. This helps you plan and organize the contents of a new website or app prior to wireframing and building it. This is also really helpful for like, let's say you're asked to like go back and find an issue with an application, right? If you go and you design how users move through that certain design or application, you'll see maybe some things are being repeated, like this and this are they lead to the same place, but they have like three different methods of getting to them. You can find out like what exactly is wrong with that user flow, and you'll be able to fix it. Any questions about that? Okay. Plain language. So plain language is communication your audience can understand the first time they read or hear it. So this initiative grew out of a government group promoting the use of plain language in government communications to the public. And these guidelines are really applicable and far beyond like government contexts. But it's the purpose of it is design accessibility and how this extends beyond visual elements like color contrast and things like that. Plain language is often overlooked, but it's really essential to creating accessible content and designs on any medium. So here's a little checklist that somebody found on the internet, I guess. And it's how to help you write out content in plain language. So it has useful headings. It's organized to serve the reader's needs. It uses you and other pronouns to speak to the reader. Short sections, short sentences, no excess words, concrete and familiar words, and it uses lists and tables to simplify complex material. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but like if I'm reading something, the biggest text is what's going to stand out to me, and then having lists breaks helps me like break down what exactly the content is talking about without having to read like 5 paragraphs about some really dense information. Plain language on the web, so people are more prone to skimming to find quick answers. You never use like click here as a link. Link language should describe what your reader will get if they click the link. Like that's what like Slack does, right? You can add a link onto text and it'll describe exactly what that link is going to. You can make liberal use of white space so pages are easy to scan, using the same words your readers would use when doing a web search for the info so that they are automatically directed to like what you're creating, not assuming that your readers have knowledge of the subject or have read related pages on your site. And then this allows you to like explain things so each page can stand on its own. Any questions about that? Cool. And Figma plugins. I know we talked about this a little bit last time. We're just gonna go over it again. So plugins serve as a little power up and help extend Figma's product functionality. And they can help with things like automating repetitive tasks, filling in real content, or checking accessibility standards and more. So plugins are built by other Figma community members and they're published on Figma's community page, and you can even build your own plugins from scratch. So for example, here's one right here. It's like Google Sheet Sync. So it's a plugin on Figma, and then you can access Google Sheets that you've made and put them directly into your Figma file. Utility plugins. So some examples of this are Better Font Picker. It will select fonts with a preview of how they look so that it's like easier for you to find something that'll match the aesthetic of what you're building. Rename it, which batch rename layers and frames. Find and replace, search for text across the file and replace just like a text editor would. Clean document, organize and clean up your Figma document. Semi-layer, select all with. So based on a wide range of properties, it'll select all of these layers within your file. Red lines, it will annotate pixel dimensions and measurements. There's even like plugins where you can make something a GIF or GIF, whatever you guys call it, um, for your files. So you don't have to like go outside of Figma to do certain things. It's really like helpful to stay within one platform. And then there's accessibility plugins. So these can help you follow accessibility guidelines to make sure your designs are inclusive. Able, which can check the color contrast ratios of your file and stimulate color vision deficiencies. Focus Orderer, which annotates and tests designs for keyboarding and screen reader users. So basically, like whether it's on your laptop or on your phone, it can kind of check and see what that looks like for you. Colorblind, you can view your designs on 8 different types of color vision deficiencies. Viewports, you can preview designs on a variety of device sizes to ensure responsiveness. And there's things like content plugins, like we just talked about with the Google Sheets. These will help you quickly populate your designs with real content. So content can include anything from names and phone numbers to profile pictures and graphs. So we have like content reel, so quickly insert text-based content into your designs, Mapsicle, add map images right into your design, use real or random data to create customizable charts with chart. I've also found that if you just type into the plugin, let's say like something that you need at the time, there's probably a plugin for it. So feel free to like explore this on your own and find plugins that are helpful to you. And Figma's plugin library is rapidly expanding, so they're bringing a lot more functionality to Figma, and there's a lot of other great plugins for design systems, icons, illustrations, and so much more. There's Timer, which you make any text into a countdown timer, blobs, which can generate organic blob shapes. This is really helpful for like, I would say like background layers and things like that. And then you don't want to have to sit there and like draw out things with your pen, but like this will automatically make a little blob for you. Figma Tetris, you can play Tetris in Figma. And I've never even used that one, but that looks pretty fun. And there's so many more. So to find and install plugins, in the file browser in Figma, you can click the community page from the left sidebar and select the plugins tab. And then you can click install to add the plugin to your Figma account. And then when you install a plugin, you can use it in your personal drafts or team files across any browser and device. And then to run a plugin, you just right click anywhere on the canvas, hover over plugins in the menu, and then you can select the plugin you want to run. And different plugins have different interfaces. So continue with the plugins UI to configure and run the plugin. And a few things to keep in mind about plugins, you need to run a plugin manually, so they can't perform actions in the background. And then plugins should also be available within your toolbar at the bottom of your Figma workspace. So that's another way to access it. So like we mentioned before, FigJam also allows you to use plugins and widgets, which are like toys you can add to your Figma files. And then you can check community to see what plugins work for Figma design versus like FigJam or both. And yeah, pretty short lecture today, but auto layout is like a really confusing thing, in my opinion. So make sure to like go over the lecture slides more. If you want to understand that better, you can stay on and ask more questions. But also, I feel like lab would be a great place for you guys to really like work one-on-one with your lab instructors and better understand auto layout. So yeah, that will be the homework this week. So the homework was creating a menu from a restaurant, and you will be using auto layout to on the components and something tangible and familiar to see how the properties sort of work.